I'm delighted today to welcome Chip Conley to the Longevity Book Club to talk about his newest book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. A little bit about Chip. He's had an extraordinary career, the founder, I think at age 28.
26 even. Oh my God.
26, I don't
Yeah.
want to get that wrong. 26, the tender age of 26, of Joie de Vivre Hospitality, which is now the second largest operator of boutique hotels in the US, and subsequently the head of global hospitality and strategy for Airbnb. At Airbnb, Chip served as something of an in-house coach and mentor to the young entrepreneurs who had started the company, and that experience led him to launch the Modern Elder Academy in 2018, which has already spread to 3 campuses across Mexico and the American Southwest. Somewhere in that very busy career, Chip has also managed to somehow become the best-selling author of 7 books, including this newest one, which has already hit the best-selling list. Chip's resume is amazing, but really, what's more important about Chip is him personally. I know both personally and reputationally that Chip has been an extraordinary partner and friend to so many in the longevity space, and someone with the extraordinary skill of showing up, making his wisdom and knowledge available to friends and colleagues in our entire community. So, Chip, thank you for showing up and being with us.
Oh, well, Ken, thank you. And Martha and Kate, who's behind the scenes. I love this community, and I am really honored to be part of this book club.
Great. Thank you, Chip. We're going to start actually with Martha, my co-host, Martha Devi, who's going to handle the first half of questions. But I do want to tell people that we want your questions, and I know you'll have lots of questions for Chip. Starting now, Martha's going to handle the first part of the interview, and I'm going to be the producer, along with Kate, of surfacing questions as we go, and then we're going to flip roles as we go. I'm going to turn it over to you, Martha.
Thanks, Ken, and Chip, always nice to see you.
Yes.
As we were prepping here, I threatened Chip with this was going to be a hard-hitting investigative interview, which is not going to happen because I and the Center on Longevity are such fans of Chip's. We have been fortunate that he has been involved with us for many, many years, and we so admire the work he's done, and just sort of welcome every chance we have to be with him and talk with him.
Thank you, Martha.
So, Chip, one of the things I've always admired about you is that you're so transparent about your own life journey. I think from the very first time I heard
my mom doesn't like that a lot. my 86-year-old parents are like, Chip, who did you come from? It's not in our family ethos.
But it really has sort of helped us understand sort of how your journey and how it's shaped your thinking. But in the book, you actually sort of talk about midlife quite differently than I've heard you talk about it before. Can you tell us a little bit about how your journey has shaped your view around kind of this 3 stages of midlife?
Yeah. So if you told me 20 years ago I'd be a poster child for a modern elder and midlife and all kinds of stuff, I would have laughed, because I was very much that 26-year-old who started a boutique hotel company. I was a youngster. I was the young Turk. I was the person who was going to go out and change the world and be a rebel. And my first book was called The Rebel Rules. And so what happened for me over the course of my 20s, 30s, and 40s is the first 20 years of me running my own company, growing it to be a large company. I loved it. And I was a bit obsessive. It was a calling and it was workaholism combined. And I did love it. And then in my mid 40s, something went on in me. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Relationships ending. My African-American foster son, who's an adult, was going to prison wrongfully. 5 friends of mine, all men, 42 to 52, took their own lives. They're unrelated, 5 unrelated over the course of 2.5 years. I had my own suicide ideation. I had an NDE, a near-death experience, where I had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic and I died. And I had a company that I didn't want to run anymore that was really struggling in the Great Recession. So I sort of looked at it all and I said, like, oh my God, I guess this is my midlife crisis. But I wasn't going like Kevin Spacey in American Beauty, to going and buying a red sports car and having an affair with someone half my age. Instead, I just sort of silently suffered. And I had one of my best friends was a coach, and she helped me a lot. But I mean, I really didn't feel like there were a whole lot of, other than your classic sort of self-help books, but there weren't even a whole lot of self-help books specific to midlife to understand what is midlife. So note to self, hey, this midlife crisis thing is a deal. It's like something I gotta keep an eye on. And then I went into my 50s and I changed everything. I did something called the Great Midlife Edit, what we call it, MEA, the Great Midlife Edit. And I really just said, okay, these are the things that aren't working for me anymore. And I got to like figure out how to prune. And I did. And my 50s were my best decade. I loved my 50s. And for a lot of reasons, I felt relevant. And a lot of women in around 50 feel invisible. A lot of men feel irrelevant. In neither case is that a whole lot of a good feeling. But yes, at 52, I joined Airbnb when it was a tiny little startup. And to be called the modern elder initially was like, hey, what are you talking about? You're like making fun of my age. But I was twice the age of the average person there, and I never worked in a tech company. So it was sort of weird to me for me to be there. But they said a modern elder is somebody who's as curious as they are wise. And so what I saw in my 50s was like, wow, midlife can be really cool. Now, I was lucky. I was privileged to be tapped on the shoulder by this little tech startup that could have gone belly up, but it turned out to be very successful. And I had a really active role in sort of steering the rocket ship for 7.5 years. But during that time, I sort of saw the other side of midlife. I saw the bad side of midlife in my late 40s, and I saw the good side of midlife in my 50s, the tale of two midlives. And I really came away from that saying, I got to make sense of this. And, I wrote a book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, based upon my experience at Airbnb. But while I was writing that book, I had this idea that formulated in my mind when I was in Baja writing the book, where I had a beach home. And I said, you know what? Why don't we have midlife? I had what I called a Baja aha. I had an epiphany. And the Baja aha is, why don't we have midlife wisdom schools? Why don't we have a place for people to sort through what they're going through, to do what Mary Catherine Bateson calls a midlife atrium, to have some spaciousness, to sort of say, like, how do I want to consciously curate the second half of my adult life? We don't have these things. We don't have midlife wisdom schools. We don't have places where people can navigate their transitions, cultivate purpose, and own their wisdom while reframing their relationship with aging. And so that's how MEA came about. And I doubled down on this idea that midlife needs to be studied. And so, long story short, is this book that just came out last week, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, is really my compilation of my personal story, social science research I've done, including Laura Carsonson's work, and Stanford Center on Longevity, as well as anecdotes and stories from the more than 4,000 alumni from 47 countries who've come to MEA's campus in Baja, and soon to be our campus in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So that's how I got to be a midlife activist.
Um, wow, I could go so many ways, but one, I mean, you have lived an exceptional life,
Mm.
The highs and the lows.
Mm.
And as you sort of talk about it, and as you sort of learn from it and begin to sort of evangelize about kind of this new light, does it resonate broadly, or, I mean, are the lessons you've learned applicable to everybody?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I could look back at my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, I would say one of my blind spots in writing that book, and the book did well and people liked it a lot, but one of my blind spots was I was privileged. I was tapped on the shoulder by the founders, and I did then figure out how to become a modern elder in that context. But a lot of people are not tapped on the shoulder. So I would say that book actually, if I look back on it, I could have written some of it a little bit differently to be even more applicable to the broader public. I think this book is very applicable to the broader public, partly because I've now had, since writing that other book, The Wisdom at Work, I've had 4,000 people, more than 4,000 people go through our program, and I've gotten to know almost every one of them. And so I understand the stories. I see the common themes. I mean, one of the things that gets better as we age is pattern recognition. And what Arthur Brooks in his book, From Strength to Strength, calls, crystallized intelligence, which is the ability to think holistically and systemically, and maybe even trust your intuition more. And I got to say that over the last 6 years since MEA opened, I have deeply felt in my gut and then studied based upon social science research, and then listening to our students, midlife students, average age 54, I've really felt like, okay, this is a pretty comprehensive list of the 12 reasons why life gets better with age. This is not Chip's list, because there are actually some on this list that don't apply to me. I'm not very good at these things, like learning how to find time affluence.
Okay.
I'm not good at that one. That's the one I'm least good at. But there are a lot of people in midlife and later who really appreciate that all of a sudden they have learned how to create some spaciousness in their lives. So yeah, this is maybe less of a Chip book, although it's definitely still personal story. There's a lot of that in there. But in terms of the 12 reasons, I actually think they're pretty documented, as the kinds of things that do get better with age.
It's funny you mentioned time affluence. Here's my copy of your book, and all of these little tags are things I found personally relevant.
Yeah.
And the boldest one is this time affluence thing, where I'm like,
you and me both.
yeah.
You and I get along well, Martha. We
Yeah.
don't, we do. And yeah, so that's one that still stymies me. And there's for all kinds of reasons, but yes.
I want to go back to something the grimace on your face early on when we were talking about, the word elder. And you and I have talked a number of times over the years about sort of needing to come up with a phrase and the language around people as they get older. Can you tell us a little bit about your sense of how language can be changed, should be used? At one point, I remember you said, I want to reclaim the positivity in the word elder.
Yeah. Well, let's start by saying, I want to speak to midlife and the longevity era of the 20th century that we added 30 years in the US of longevity to the average person. So like midlife really, if the average age of longevity was, or lifespan was 47 in the year 1900, what was midlife if the average age was 47? Now, of course, that includes all the people who died earlier, et cetera, but it wasn't a midlife in 1900. It wasn't until 1965 that the term midlife crisis was actually even coined. And so I actually think midlife is, the way I would define it as a starting point, and as we get into some of this language, is midlife is a stage of life more than an age. Some people say it's 35 to 75, and there as you mentioned, Martha, there are 3 stages to it: early midlife, 35 to 50, core of midlife, 50 to 60, and later midlife, 60 to 75. But I think it's less of an age, more of a stage. And it's really the bridge between early adulthood and later adulthood. And so midlife is the obvious bridge in between. How long that bridge is, whether it's 40 years or 20 years, depending upon what you believe or what an academic believes, to be determined. So as we think about life stages and longevity, let's start by saying we don't have language for this, partly because it's sort of a newer phenomena. And frankly, also because 120 years ago, 250 years ago, people wore wigs to make themselves look older than their age. Now, as according to yesterday's New York Times, there are Gen Zers doing Botox. Like it's a different age we live in today, where nobody wants to look old or feel old, or old is a bad word. So I think the starting point is, I wanted, because they called me the modern elder at Airbnb, and I loved the definition: someone who's as curious as they are wise, and that someone who is not looking for reverence, they're looking for relevance. And that, all that kind of language was like, ooh, this is good stuff. But I have to say, having written the book, Wisdom at Work: The Making of a Modern Elder, having created the Modern Elder Academy, which is now, our short version, just MEA, there are a lot of people who don't want to be an elder because it sounds like elderly. And so it's just one more example of the fear of aging. And then, next thing we know, I was like, okay, I'm focusing on midlife. Well, there's a lot of people who don't want to be in midlife because midlife has a brand attached to crisis. So I think we're really at a stage right now where we really need to rethink how we're using language to create not an anti-aging product and service, but a pro-aging set of products and services. And again, if the biohackers of the world, the tech bros, are of their mindset that aging is a disease, nobody would want a pro-aging product because that's like a pro-disease product. But I wrote this book partly because I felt like Becca Levy's work at Yale showing that when you shift your mindset from a negative to a positive, which is not easy to do, but it is doable. When it comes to aging, you gain 7.5 years of additional life. Where's the pro-aging message out there? Where's this is actually a more additional life than if you stop smoking at 50 or start exercising at 50. And yet we have all kinds of PSAs, public service announcements, for stopping smoking and starting exercising. We do not have public service announcements for the idea that getting older is a good thing. And so some of the language pieces that I'm interested in is I think looking at pro-aging. I gave a TED talk last year. And when I said pro-aging on stage at the TED conference, like people got up and clapped. I was like, oh, okay, that's a good one. People like that. Another term I've come to really appreciate is age fluidity. We have gender fluidity.
Yeah.
Someone who's age fluid it's hard to define them by their age or their generation. They're all the ages they've ever been or all the ages they'll ever be. And I sort of like that because it's better than ageless. Because if someone's ageless, it's suggesting age is a bad thing. Or timeless.
Yeah.
Ageless. Yeah. It's like, okay, no, but like age is a good thing. It can be. It has some bad sides, has some good sides. We know the bad sides, short-term memory loss, just as we get comfortable in our own skin, everything sags. Bottom line is what I really want to have people feel comfortable with is that they can be just about any age they want to be. And we're also, looking at chronological age, biological age, cognitive age, psychological age. There's lots of different ages now. And then finally, I like the idea of the midlife chrysalis. And that is the premise of the midlife chrysalis as opposed to a crisis is really based upon the U-curve of happiness research, which shows that, and the U-curve of happiness research, some people like it, some people don't. I mean, it has some issues with it, but generally speaking, I like it a lot because it shows, cross-culturally, that there's a long, slow decline in life satisfaction from our early 20s to bottoming out around 45 to 50. And then with each decade after that, we get happier and happier. And I think Laura Carstensen's work about, the
socio-emotional positivity theory.
Oh my God, that needs a shortened version. Speaks to that as well. So the idea that midlife is a time of transformation, like a chrysalis for the caterpillar to butterfly, is to me intriguing and an interesting metaphor because everybody understands that. We all learned that when we were kids, and so I think I'm trying to really elevate that language as well.
So somebody sort of asked in the chat, Chip, can you speak about inspiration? Who gave you permission to be a badass butterfly midlife disruptor?
I wanted to ask that question merely for that phrasing of
no kidding.
butterfly midlife disruptor. It's not actually the question, it's that phrase that I love.
Oh God, that is a great phrase. So yeah, I being one of the first boutique hoteliers and being at Airbnb and now doing MEA, I do have a side of me that likes to be the rebel, the pioneer, trying new things. I like to have a growth mindset if I can. So I'm less focused on proving myself, more focused on improving myself. But no one gave me permission. I mean, like the person who gave me permission is my friend Chip Hankins. So Chip was one of my 5 friends who took his own life. Exact same age as me, same year, 1960 baby. He was 47 when he died, and no one knew he was going through what he was going through, and including his wife and two young boys and sons. So permission granted for me, it was really the idea of how do I help elevate the upside of aging, and how do we create the space, especially for men, but in terms of MEA, 62% of the people who come are women, but how do we create the space for men in midlife and women in midlife to not feel alone, to understand the roadmap for navigating the kinds of transitions we have in midlife? When adolescents, we have all kinds of transitions, and we have all kinds of rites of passage and rituals and schools and tools and guidance counselors and college counselors and parents and a lot. But when we're going through and we go through adolescence collectively with peers and we can compare notes, we don't go through middlescence in that same way. We go through middlescence feeling somewhat solitary. Some of the key things that happen in midlife we haven't even talked about. Only recently as menopause started to be a conversation for women. Wasn't much of a conversation 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So these natural transitions that happen in midlife, parents passing away, empty nest, menopause, changing careers, getting divorced, having a health diagnosis yourself. We don't really have much of a social structure to provide people guidance and a roadmap. Yeah, you have friends. Yes, you could have a coach or a therapist. You can read a self-help book. All that's true. But what I really wanted to do is to help in terms of my butterfly. It's funny you asked that question. Someone called me yesterday a butterfly whisperer. Okay, that's what I'm doing. I'm like going to little chrysalises out there. Like, okay, it's okay to come out. It's on the other side. Come on out. And to be in that place feels right for me because, gosh, I'm a hospitality person. I love to create spaces that help people feel alive. That's why I called my company Joie de Vivre. I was on the board of the Esalen Institute in Big Sur for 10 years and taught there for 12 years. I like personal growth and retreat centers. And then I have this content. The curriculum of MEA comes from both Wisdom at Work as well as this new book, Learning to Love Midlife. But it's also with just amazing faculty who have come and taught with us, who bring their wisdom around the topics of life stages and particularly midlife and aging.
I loved it when I heard that you had that early connection to Burning Man.
Yeah, I was the first board member of the Burning Man nonprofit that now owns Burning Man. It was Burning Man. It was a for-profit that became a nonprofit, and I was one of the people who helped it to become a nonprofit. And I have a lot of history there. And so yeah, I mean, I've always been a little bit off, a little different. Which again, my parents they don't know what to do with me. I'm very transparent about how I talk about things, and I'm a little weird, and I'm going to own that. I mean, one of the things that I think that we really need to see as an advantage of getting older is being able to just be comfortable in our own skin and just be our own original self. Oscar Wilde long ago wrote, "Be yourself, everyone else is taken." Great quote.
I loved what you're talking about, sort of acknowledging life transitions. We often talk about at the center that, once you hit 50, about the only two transitions that are ever acknowledged are when you leave, you retire, and then your memorial service.
Yeah, exactly.
And that there are so many other transitions that you already mentioned that.
And the retirement one's like sort of weird now too, because am I retired or am I not retired?
Right.
And both of my grandfathers worked for 40 years for the same company. So they're going to have a retirement party and they're going to get a gold watch. But today, we're scattered. We have 12 or 13 different jobs in the course of our career.
Or at the same time.
Or at the same time. And then we go into portfolio life and so there's that, even that ritual or rite of passage is sort of evaporated to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah. There was another comment I want to touch on in the chat. And it goes back to the conversation about time abundance. Michelle Ransom said that sounds a little too close to being proud of the cult of busyness. Yes. I wonder what you think about that. On reflection, help us understand.
Well, I think for me, I will say my religion of almost feeling like productivity is, what I bow to, or being effective and efficient, is a function of a couple of things. One is, why do I stay busy? Because on some level, at a young age, I learned that having a busy calendar made you feel like you were having a full and good life. I do love an empty day, particularly on a weekend where I just have nothing scheduled. So it's not like I'm bored or I don't know what to do. I have a lot of, a really diverse set of interests. But there's something Calvinist in my mind that says the work ethic is important. And maybe, a little bit of it is, and this is true of anybody who has an addiction, and I have a little bit of a work addiction, is it's a distraction from something else.
Mhm.
You're not dealing with the other stuff. And when whether you're working or you're drinking or you're gambling or you're whatever it is, the thing that is the addiction, you end up, being able to distract yourself. But I think the other piece for me in terms of the busyness is I am a really curious, passionate person. And so I find things that just totally intrigue me. And
Mhm.
I want to sort of like go down the rabbit hole and learn more or go and do something about it. And so that's the calling part of me. That's the part that I find callings, in my life more easily maybe than the average person. But I do agree that with this cult of busyness, it's like, it's like it's sort of like we're all in the army together, and your stripes on if of how senior you are in the army is a function of how busy you are.
Yeah.
And so you wear your stripes, and so when someone says, "So how are you doing?" And they say, "Oh, I'm just so busy." I'm like, I'm just crazy busy. For me, when people say to me now, as someone, Michael Murphy, who started Esalen, he and I had a little time together yesterday. He's 93 years old. And he said, "Chip, how you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm raw and imperfect." And that captures how I want to be the rest of my life, raw and imperfect. So I think all of you on this call should think about, you're going to be asked thousands of times between now and when you die, how you doing? Start to think about an alternative way to answer that. Not to talk about your busyness, not to talk about, okay, I'm okay, but actually what's true for you. And I know for me, my default will be raw and imperfect because I think it actually describes my life pretty well.
And I think that'll be a nice sweatshirt,
Yes.
printed, raw and imperfect. So next time I see you, I'll have one.
Okay, thank
Um,
you.
so you said, you love a weekend where you don't have anything to do. Do you give yourself permission to lean into it, or do you still feel guilty when you?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I have a whole bunch of mindfulness practices that I do that help to center me. For those who don't know it, less than 2 weeks ago, I finished 36 sessions of radiation over the course of almost 2 months. And from almost all of last year, was on androgen deprivation therapy, which basically means they got rid of 99% of my testosterone. And I had my prostate taken out in June, and stage 3 cancer. So it had spread to my pelvic lymphs. Long story short is, I, there's a lot of things that I have had to do, and that were things I've known for a while, but maybe it wasn't practicing them as much, to be able to sustain myself with that kind of experience. And then literally 13 days ago, finish my radiation, jump on a plane the next day to New York, and be on Good Morning America on
Mhm.
Monday and the Today Show on Wednesday last week. So meditation is a big piece of that. Exercise, a big piece of that. I have an inversion machine, and I literally turn myself upside down every morning for about 8 minutes. And I love that. It's good for my spine, and it sort of lengthens my body, but there's also something psychologically beautiful about being upside down for a few minutes. Um, and I'm very careful about my sleep. I go to bed almost religiously at 8:30 every night, even on weekend nights. So long story short is, to be a whirling dervish like I am, I better have a bunch of practices that are fueling and sustaining me. And I'm a bit of an ambivert. I come across as an extrovert. I was definitely an introvert up till puberty. And I've, learned how to be a very good extrovert. And yet, as I've gotten older, as is true for many of us, I have become more of an ambivert, ambidextrous between extrovert and introvert. And so I do need my time and space alone.
Mhm.
This is part of the reason why I like writing so much. I have a daily blog, Wisdom Well, that's on the MEA website, as well as on my chipconley.com website. You're welcome to check it out. And bottom line is, I like writing partly because it gives me space to be introverted, and I need that. That's where I sometimes need my refueling.
I sort of made note that you had called yourself an introvert, which surprised me, but I sort of resonate with it.
Yeah, I
And
can see, I see it in you for sure.
uh,
But I see you,
I don't think
you
it's
could,
I don't think it's that hidden.
no, no.
So I just have one more thing I wanted to mention. It was in the afterword of your book, and it was a quote you got from a letter written by a
Oh,
woman named
yeah,
Allison.
yeah,
And it said, Chip, I appreciate you reminding me that growing and aging are the same thing.
yeah.
And I just think that's a nice way to capture um, the positivity in, you know, getting
Well,
older.
again, look at our language. You know, you say to a 15-year-old, my, how you've grown since the last time I saw you, but you would never say that to a 55-year-old, even though they may have grown emotionally, spiritually, relationally, intellectually, but it's all about the physical side. And you would never say to a 15-year-old, oh my, how you've aged, but you probably wouldn't say that to a 55-year-old either. But
Yeah.
we've sort of got this idea that somehow there you grow up to a certain age and then you just start aging. Like, do you stop growing at 25? And you start aging at that point. Uh, what I believe is we need to learn from redwood forests, which are, you know, these old growth forests. I think we need to start creating language about old growth humans, people who are both aging and growing at the same time. And again, that's what the book's about, is like, how are we aging and how are we growing? And in what ways is our growth as we get older hugely valuable and better than anything 20 or 30 years earlier? And I think we get very fixated on the deprivation side, the loss side of aging, what you lose due to aging.
Mhm.
And so I do think that aging and growing are the same thing. And the more we start to embrace that and realize that this human vessel, this body we have, is just a rental vehicle that was distributed to us at birth, and over time, as it gets more miles on it, it's not going to look quite as good on the outside, but it, you know, hopefully feels better and better on the inside. But, you know, we are so fixated on that rental vehicle, you know, as in American society. And I just think helping people to see that, you know, the aging body is only one component part of how we age. And yes, it's one that actually isn't always pretty. But it's also, as long as we're maintaining the vehicle so it can live longer, over time, hopefully it's more about the long-term maintenance of the vehicle and less about the short-term vanity.
Okay,
Chip,
so
let me
I was gonna say I'm gonna hand it over to Ken, but I want to say next time we talk, I want to talk about that public service announcement strategy. So
Beautiful.
So Chip, I'm going to bring a question from the audience, which goes back to the concept of time affluence, which is, I think, an interesting concept. Someone was wondering, you know, in our society where being busy is associated with purpose, with importance, with value, how do you convince yourself and others that they need to take time to reflect, time to put the car in the shop, perhaps, to pick up on your car analogy, that it's worth the investment in time to do that,
Well,
for your own long-term value?
I mean, I think some people actually have practices around this. For some, they actually have a digital Sabbath. They might take Saturday or Sunday off, and they are offline for the day. So there's a practice around that. Bill Gates famously would go off into the woods with a bunch of books once a year for a week, and that was his practice. I think the idea of gap years and sabbaticals are becoming more and more popular for people in midlife. And that can be a practice. So those are all sort of structural practices where you say, like, okay, I'm going to, I have a friend, and once a month, that he and his wife go for a 3-day getaway. And they do that, and they're empty nesters now, and they get away for 3 days. They go offline that whole time, and they go to a different place each time. They don't have a second home. They just go to different places for a long weekend, and that's their practice. So I think we got to start by saying, if you create a practice around it, then it actually is easier to adhere to. But then there's the question that I would ask someone, including myself, is like, you know, how often do you feel burned out? And what do you do to refuel yourself? Because all of us in one way or another feel burned out, whether it's burned out with the scary news, we hear on a daily basis around the world, or whether it's burned out with our own expectations we're not living up to, or it's burned out around being in the sandwich generation, taking care of our parents and our kids at the same time. There's a lot of burnout out there. So the question is, what is the antidote? What's the thing you do to address that? Sometimes that actually means you got to look at what's creating the burnout, rather than just putting a Band-Aid on it. Like, okay, as my mom has finally learned at 86, she's just not watching news anymore because it was burning her out, in terms of, and so sometimes you have to just change the dynamic of what's there. And then other times you can't change it. You can't change the channel. You can't change the channel of the fact that your parents are aging and your kids are struggling, and you got your obligations there. And then you have to sort of look at, okay, what do I do? Like later today, I'm going to go to Kabuki Springs and Spa here in San Francisco, a business that I've owned for 25 years. And I'm going to get a massage. And I try to get a regular massage because getting out of my brain and into my body, whether that's physical workout or having some body work done, is a good thing for me. So yeah, I mean, I think it's, if you have a hard time, anybody on the call has a hard time with this, look for a friend who you think is getting this right. And then have a conversation, go out and have coffee or a meal with that friend and say, like, I'd just love to tap into your wisdom about how I could find spaciousness in my life to actually reduce my burnout. And just have that conversation. I mean, ultimately you might need a coach who could help you, but use family and friends as a starting point. Or listen, come to MEA. I mean, this is what we specialize in. One of the things we specialize, MEA is a place where people come in midlife, defined broadly, to actually change the habits. And sometimes you have to change your habitat to change the habits. And people come and go home with a whole new perspective of how they're going to curate their life, including the daily, mundanities. Is that a word? Yeah.
I don't think so, but it could be.
It could be, yeah.
You're a person who coins words, so
I know, the mundanities. Sounds like something you eat that didn't taste good. But yes, I think those are some of the things I would suggest.
So essentially, as you talk about some of the pressures of midlife, you're sort of surrounded by people, older generations, younger generations, work. But it actually sounds kind of loneliness, and we have a loneliness crisis in this country, which sometimes we associate with old people, and it's actually is highest among young people. But what about loneliness in midlife? And what do you do? How do you think about it? And how should what advice do you have for the audience on that?
Social dislocation, feeling less connected and less of a sense of belonging, is true across all ages. It's more severe in certain ages, but there's no age that is actually somehow as good as it was 25 years ago. We have fallen out of belonging. We have fallen out of belonging. And so there's a term that we like to use at MEA called social wellness. When we think of the word wellness, we think of it, oh, my sleep, my diet, my exercise. But when we look at, whether it's Bob Waldinger's work at Harvard, or Phil Pizzo, Stanford, or, the center, or even the Blue Zone's work, what you see consistently is the number one variable for living a longer, happier, healthier life is how invested are you in your social relationships, especially, in my opinion, and I think the data is somewhat conclusive on this, according to the Harvard research, especially in midlife, because one of the challenges we have in midlife is the spinning plate phenomena of our 20s, 30s, and 40s. We are consuming and producing, and we are accumulating. The first half of our life is about accumulating knowledge, friends, kids in our life, jobs, stuff. And then the second half of our life, if we're getting it right, is about editing. And no one gave us the memo. No one said, okay, it's time for your great midlife edit. And that's necessary because, quite frankly, if you are accumulate, you've got so much baggage on this midlife marathon that you just wear yourself out. And so one of the challenges of midlife is that if over your 20s, 30s, and 40s, and this is particularly true for men, more true for men than women, if you have lost touch with how to have friendships and relationships outside of work, and your life is pretty much your work and your family, and that's where most of the time goes, then when you hit your 50s, let's say, and maybe you have some time affluence coming in. Maybe your kids have gone off to college. Maybe your parents are doing fine, and you have a little more space. You really don't know what to do. Like if muscle atrophies, you go out and exercise it, because friendship is a practice. But if we sort of just feel like stuck, like I feel lonely, I don't know who to go to. The friends that I used to have, they seem like they're very self-sufficient and fine. In fact, your friends who you think are doing fine are having the same experience you're having. And you just need to figure out a way to connect. We've had so many groups, private groups, come to MEA and realized, oh my God, whether it's an extended family or a peer-to-peer network group, or even some companies, like people don't realize how much they think that their loneliness is just their own affliction, when in fact, a lot of the people they know are feeling the same thing. So how we create this crucible for people to feel connected with each other, feel vulnerable, feel a sense of collective effervescence, their sense of ego separation declining, and their sense of communal joy connecting, and see the moral beauty in each other. The idea that your courage, kindness, and equanimity give me a sense of like what humanity can be. All of that, we need to find crucible for that, because we've lost that. We used to have it with Rotary clubs. We used to have it with PTA. We used to have it with church. And a lot of the social structure that we had that helped create some of this, when I think about this, like I can't imagine my parents going and having vulnerable conversations at PTA with their friends. So let's be honest, like it may have not have been that vulnerable, but at least they were seeing friends on a regular basis. That has gone away. And so the combination of that and going with life online has been a really toxic cocktail in terms of having people feel the deep sense of being seen and being cared for. And so, I mean, what we're talking about right now is like core to what MEA tries to do. And I think it's probably our secret sauce that is most valuable to the people who graduate.
Yeah, I sort of tend to think of it that the infrastructure of community is
That's right.
of social connection has sort of been stripped away. We can
That's right.
build roads, but we've sort of lost that. And I think it's very hard, especially in midlife.
Yeah.
For a lot of
I mean, it's interesting. There was in the Biden bill of a year or two ago, when the big, very expensive bill, the reality is there's a social infrastructure piece to that. There was the physical infrastructure, which got passed. And then some of it was the social infrastructure, which included, help with kids and a lot of things that helped, caregiving, and that went away. And it classic case is what we can measure, and it's physical and tangible, we value and give money to. The things that are intangible, we have a tendency not to give money to.
I think it's interesting you point out sort of the differences between men and women. There was a survey done among married couples nearing retirement a couple of years ago about what they're looking forward to doing post-retirement.
Yes. Yes.
Women,
talk about this. It was so good. I read this.
Women said, I want to spend time with my kids, my grandkids, and my friends. And these are friends that they made while raising their kids. It's the PTA moms, it's the soccer moms. And the husband said, I'm looking forward to spending time with my wife.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the classic case where both couple, two income couple, they're both retiring around the same time, and she's frightened by having him around the house as much, and he doesn't know how to go out and find new things to do. And women, again, these are generalizations, but there's social science behind this. Women juggle more. They're multitasking and multi-rolling. They have more roles that they inhabit. Men have less roles. So when the primary role that a man has, which is often, again, these are generalizations, often his work, when that goes away, oh my God, there's a gaping hole. Whereas for women, there are other things that they've been doing that can actually fill that space. And for men, they are often lost. And we just had, like last week, we had a workshop at MEA called Reframing Retirement. And we've done some online courses on this too. And it's been really popular because a lot of people don't want to retire. By choice or necessity, they need to continue working, but they don't want to do it. They don't want to work the way they have. And they want to find purpose and they want to figure out how to have a portfolio career. And their parents are not the role models for how they want to live their 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. And so we are in the process, I think, as a society, to try to create new role models for how to live your 60s and beyond, as opposed to saying you retire at 60 or 65 and you live on a golf course and you play bingo, which of course that is a total, yeah. Oh, Simon Chan just put this there. Simon, thank you for being on the call. Simon's one of the professors of that, that program. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if this data is accurate, but Ken Dykewald has said that the average American retiree watches 47 hours of TV a week. And that's that's scary, because not only does that mean that people are not getting the physical wellness they need probably, but it means they basically just replaced their job with the TV. And yeah, not a good thing.
Yeah, that is a scary concept. One of the things that your book did inspired me, Chip, was sort of think about the boundaries of midlife. And it occurred to me in thinking about this, it's very different from person to person, even from community to community. So, for instance, here in DC, Washington, DC, where I live, average life expectancy in Georgetown is almost 95. That's the most affluent area of
Are
town.
you kidding? 95?
No, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Wow.
But in Anacostia, it's 68. It's
Yeah.
across town.
Yeah.
And the boundaries suggests to me that the boundaries of midlife are very different, not only the characteristics. Youth may be actually sort of similar, a lot of different ways, but sort of the structure of living is similar. Maybe even the structure of old age is similar for those communities, for those who make it. But midlife is very different in terms of what it is. And I didn't know where to take
it's a bit amorphous, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so what are the implications of that? Sort of that people have different, and I use one sort of very jarring example of it, but the lives that people lead are very different in midlife.
Yeah,
and
that is true. In midlife, you could be like Hoda Kotb, from Today's Show, who's become a friend, and I was on her show last week. She had kids at 52. Now she adopted them, but to actually have kids for the first time at 52, that we didn't see that in the past. By 52, you were a grandmother with 4 grandkids, and so the kinds of ways that the new map of life is which comes from the center, really is about suggesting that this is not the game of life. This is not the board game where there's a singular pathway through your life, because it suggests that was episodic. You had 3 stages of life. But I think so. I think sometimes the generalizations of like, what is midlife? Well, it's very different than if you had kids at 22 than if you had them at 52. It's very different than if you are someone working in a factory or working, with your body, versus someone who's a knowledge worker. Because when people say like, oh, like nobody wants to retire. Oh yeah, someone who's working on an assembly line, someone who's doing physical labor, yes, they want to retire because their body, it's having a toll on their body. I understand why a knowledge worker doesn't want to retire often, because it's suggesting that they're turning their brain off. So those are 2 completely different scenarios. So I think the challenge around midlife or around life stages in the middle age is that the case studies, the user descriptions of each kind of person can be quite varied. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. I do think the one size fits all that does make sense in midlife is to start having some longevity literacy, to try to understand how much life you still have ahead of you. Now, longevity in the US sucks right now, and we could go into that in depth, but I will not. I'm assuming most people on this call know what's going on, especially relative to other countries. The fact we're behind China, Chile, Uruguay, Croatia. I mean, like the fact our longevity is lower than all those places is crazy, but it is true. But I think what's also true is that if you are 65 and healthy and fit a certain socioeconomic demographic, you probably have a lot more life ahead of you than you think you do. One of the things we've done at MEA is ask our people who come, and we've had people as young as 25 and old as 88, but 75% of people are between 45 and 65. So the average age is 54. We've asked, like, what time, how long do you think you're going to live till? And 90 was the answer. 54 is exactly halfway between 18 and 90.
Mhm.
And when you help people to see, like, oh my gosh, I have as much adulthood ahead of me as I have behind me, that means you're going to start asking questions like, wow, 10 years from now, what will I regret if I don't learn it or do it now? And these are the kinds of questions we need to ask in midlife. And no matter what you're doing, what are the things you will regret if you don't learn it or do it now? Because learning to become a beginner and have an openness to new experiences and have curiosity woven into your life is very much correlated with living a longer, healthier, happier life.
So let's make this a conversation, a little bit of sort of advice to us. And by the way, I just want to say, I see in the chat, like, people are connecting and actually talking about clubs and meeting up, and I actually love that.
Yeah.
In fact,
Yay. Yay.
that this is being inspired to do that. I think it's wonderful. What's the other than going to MEA, which I think we should all do, but relatively small percentage of people will ultimately do, or you'll be overrun. What are the things that they should take stock of in their life in midlife at that 54 that will help them think about all that runway they have in front of them and make it most productive and happy?
Well, I think one of the most valuable things a person can do, and I write about this in the book, is this great midlife edit. There's a chapter on why learning how to edit your life is one of the most important qualities in midlife or in any time in your life. Because if you can actually create some space in your life, what you've done is given yourself not only some psychic benefit of and just good for your body to just like have space, but also you've given yourself some opportunity to become a beginner again. And so I think one of the most important things people need to look at is every year, maybe instead of having New Year's resolutions, maybe you have what's the one thing I'm going to become a beginner at this year? And every year you're going to become a beginner at something new. But in order to do that, you have to have a growth mindset, not be too self-critical, and have a fixed mindset. You need to have the space to learn something new. At 57, I asked that question, 10 years from now, what will I regret if I don't learn it or do it now? And so I started learning Spanish and learning to surf at 57, even though I had a little mantra or mindset in my head saying, I'm too old to do this. But at 67, I would have been even more old to do that. So anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. So to think 10 years out and say, like, I'll regret that, then, that's a form of wisdom. So I would say that is worth doing. Yeah.
Can I just make the observation? So one of the things that always nags at me that at age 60, like, I sometimes think I should have this all figured out by now. And I don't, and I view that as sort of a weakness, but actually, you're suggesting
it's a strength. It's what you just said, Ken. I love what you just said, because that is what you said is exactly why sometimes people get stunted, because they think no one says at age 15, I should have this all figured out by now. And so why at 55 are we saying I should have this all figured out by now? Yes, I probably are wiser and know more than I did when I was 15, 40 years earlier. But life is like just a work in progress. And part of our job in life, as Dan Gilbert has said in his TED Talk, the Harvard professor, we vastly underestimate how much change we have ahead of us. So I see a couple Q&A questions here that are not in the chat.
Anyone that you want to get to? Yeah.
Let's Kate has this one. So you mentioned the reason you are not best at of the 12 reasons, which is time abundance or time affluence. But which one or two do you really enjoy the most? Yeah, there is a reason, which is I know my life story. I understand my life story and my narrative. And when you're about a quarter of the way through a novel, you don't necessarily know all the themes and all the characters, and you don't know where it's going. But by halfway through, you usually do. And I think that's true of our lives as well. By a quarter of the way through our life, we understand a little bit of stuff, but we don't understand nearly as much as we do halfway through. And once you understand the themes of your life and the pattern recognition of how you operate in the world, wow, does it give you the license and the through line to understand where it could go moving forward. So I would say that's one of the ones I'm better at. I'd say another one that I'm better at is the 12th one of the 12 reasons. I'm learning to grow. I'm feeling like I'm growing whole. So we're growing old, but growing whole means you integrate all of who you are into, and all of the ages you've ever been into, who you show up with. And so I'd say that's one. So there's actually on the Chip Conley website, if you go to the Learning to Love Midlife part of that website and click on that, you'll see there's a midlife checkup quiz. And it gives you like a 10-minute quiz so you can see which of the 12 reasons most resonate with you and which of the ones least resonate. And then I see Lisa Wise has a question. We in the cancer community are wondering, when will you write your book about thriving in cancer shadow?
I'm glad you that. I was holding that question till the end.
Oh, yeah. Wow. It's
That's
a
a
good ending question. Thank you,
good
Lisa.
question. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa.
When's it coming?
I don't know. I mean, I do think there's possibility it will come. For those who want to understand it, go to my blog and then go back basically the last 2 months. I've written a lot about it ever since I got my first diagnosis 5.5 years ago. But going into radiation, and I had, also back in June. So going back, and all you'd have to do is go and probably go to the Wisdom Well blog on my website or on MEA's website, meawisdom.com, and just do a search for cancer. And you'll see what blog posts have I written about it. And they've been very frank, very, very transparent, including all of the bodily humiliations that can happen when you're going through something like this. So I don't know that I have that book yet ready to think about. I'm still on the book tour of this book. I do think talking about it is really essential. We get very into the physical side of frailties and the physical side of biohacking our way to living forever, and we often miss the emotional side. And I really have tried to elevate that, especially from a man's point of view.
So Chip, you are entitled Detox from this book before you're pinned down to the next one. Kate has put up in the chat how you can find the quiz and the Wisdom Well blog. So if anyone's looking for that, it's right there in the chat. So Chip, we're almost at time. I just want to see, thank you for your really inspiring conversation. Is there any last thought or any last story from your book that you want to share before we sign up for this one?
No.
Any story? Yeah.
No, I think I might just finish by just saying, let's find new language. Let's work on this together. I think it's a critical part of us being able to tell a new story around the value of aging, the value of intergenerational collaboration, and the idea that midlife, frankly, is a bridge, maybe over troubled waters, to that era of one's life when we get happier and happier. If we feel like midlife is just on the doorway to death, then it's understandable why people don't want to go through it.
Yeah. Thank you, Chip, for this. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Chip, for this amazing conversation.
Always thank you, Chip.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
One last note for people. This will be a hard act of Chip Conley is always a hard act to follow, but there will be another act. So our next event will be, we'll be talking with Danielle Aragoni, the author of Climate Resilience for an Aging Nation, about the critical need to build age-friendly policies into our approach to climate change and resilience. That event will be on March 6th at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, and producer Kate is putting up the registration link in the chat. You can always register on our website as well, longevity-project.com. Thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you there.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Martha. And thank you, producer Kate.